welcome to the second in our 2014 webinar series on the Support Anti-Terrorism by Fostering Effective Technologies Act of 2002. We'd like to thank all of you for joining us today and throughout the fiscal year. Today our webinar focuses on Safety Act applications for stadium security-related technologies. If you're having trouble with the audio on your computer, you can always dial 888-469-0854, or for international attendees, 1-415-228-3912, and use host code 2815606. The dial-in information is on the left-hand side of the screen for reference. The slides from this webinar are also available for download in the upper left-hand corner at the end of the session. The audio for this webinar will be available for download at www.safetyact.gov in the future. Finally, if you have specific suggestions for future webinars, please let us know by sending an email to safetyacthelpdesk@dhs.gov or let us know in the chat room at the end of the webinar. Some of you may have attended our September 2013 webinar about service-based technologies. The concepts addressed in that webinar will be tailored in today's webinar, which focuses on services and technologies for event, arena, and stadium security. The webinar is meant to be independent of venue size, and when you think about the information presented in this webinar, you must think about it in terms of your particular venue's capacity, location, and risk profile. Though we are presenting the information in the context of a stadium or an arena, the concepts in this webinar also apply to other types of venues, including office buildings and transportation facilities. We will focus on the specific definitions and challenges posed by these types of applications. Our submission tips will be specifically tailored to event, arena, and stadium security, and will organize application requirements into the main components of stadium security. We will go through the following components: vulnerability, risk, and threat assessments, plans, policies, and procedures, personnel, technical security measures, performance and effectiveness, safety, and coordination with federal, state, and local law enforcement, along with local fire and emergency authorities. Careful development and demonstration of these components form the cornerstone of a successful Safety Act application for stadium security. Finally, we will share some general case studies and lessons learned from previous applications to help you avoid common pitfalls. This session does assume that you have some level of familiarity with the Safety Act website and the general process. If you are new to the Safety Act process, our previous webinars, slides, and audio can be viewed on www.safetyact.gov. As always, OSAI staff members will be available to address specific questions in the chat room during the webinar. We will also have some time for questions at the end. If you have more questions and need additional help to answer your specific questions, you can always contact OSAI via the Safety Act Help Desk at a later time. Scheduling a teleconference or using the pre-application process prior to submitting a full application is always encouraged. Now, I'd like to turn it over to Bruce Davidson, Director of the Office of Safety Act Implementation, for some opening remarks. Bruce?
Thank you. Well, I'd like to thank everyone for joining us today and for your commitment to improving our homeland security. We're fortunate to have a large number of participants in today's webinar and look forward to providing information, points for consideration, and recommendations which we trust you will find useful. Some participants are no doubt familiar with the Safety Act program and may have participated in webinars or outreach events we have held in the past. For those of you who are new to the Safety Act neighborhood, I would like to provide a brief introduction. Safety Act program is a different type of government program when compared to many others in several respects. First, we're a small program with a modest budget and a small core federal staff. We are not a regulatory program, so we typically don't have fixed requirements. Evaluations of applications are based on criteria contained in the Safety Act statute and the DHS implementing regulations. The criteria are very important as the program exists to advance the public interest and welfare by improving our nation's anti-terrorism readiness and resilience. Both of these documents can be found on our program website at www.safetyact.gov. The program is more of an incentive-centric program where we try to incentivize the private sector to develop and deploy effective anti-terrorism products, services, and capabilities. The Act provides the Department's senior leadership the authority to exercise broad discretion as they carry out their decision-making responsibilities with respect to the program. We believe this enables us to do more and make the program more impactful, not less, and more relevant, not less. We believe that a brief review of the listing of approved technologies on our website will bear this out. Consider, for example, just this fiscal year, which started in October 2013. Well, we got off to a delayed start due to the government shutdown during the first half of October. We've come roaring back with more than 40 approvals so far for a major professional sports league, a major stadium, a security management system broadly deployed by the chemical industry, an aviation-related cybersecurity technology, and the first Safety Act approval for a university and a presidential center. There are also a number of innovative technologies that have received approval. We also have some noteworthy applications in our inventory that we plan to complete in the near future. Even though we have made significant progress with respect to our programs, development and execution, we are not content with resting on our past accomplishments, but continue to look to the future. In this regard, we have several initiatives underway I will briefly outline for you towards the end of this webinar. But for now, it's time to move on with the business at hand, and I'll turn things over to Dr. Idle to proceed with our agenda. Thanks again for joining.
Great, thanks, Bruce. Before we get started, I'd like to point out that part of the Safety Act's success is dependent on the trust that you, private companies, are able to put in our organization. We ask that you supply us with detailed technical and financial information as part of your submission. Rest assured, if you have any worries, that OSAI takes very seriously the strict maintaining of information security. The Safety Act website is DHS CIO certified and accredited. All users of the system sign conflict of interest and non-disclosure statements for each application. However, we do note that the Safety Act website cannot process classified materials. Please contact the Safety Act Help Desk in advance of submitting your forms if you wish to include classified materials. However, note that a lack of sufficient data can delay or stop the processing of your submission. If you have any concerns, contact OSAI before you submit your application, contour, or notice of modification. Also, if you have large amounts of information to submit or video clips, you can contact the Safety Act Help Desk for assistance. We might need you to send in a CD or DVD. We'll make sure that you have that number by the end of the webinar. Our contact information is also available at www.safetyact.gov in the Contact Us section. Before I introduce the layers of stadium security, I'd like to set the stage. The definition of technology, as set forth in the Safety Act Final Rule, states that a technology for Safety Act purposes includes any product, equipment, service, including support services, device, or technology, including information technology, or any combination of the foregoing. Event, arena, and stadium security, in particular, are multi-layered. Security for venues includes a variety of component technologies, such as policies and procedures, plans, personnel, and physical defenses to protect and defend the facility and patrons. These measures are relevant to Homeland Security, as arenas and stadia are typically considered to be categorized as critical infrastructure by the department. How these layers are applied and the various solutions you employ are dependent on a number of factors, including the size of the venue, the type of crowds, the venue location, and your available security resources. While we have found that there is no one correct solution for all venues, we have found that there are some common themes. We will be addressing these themes today. If you have questions about your specific venue and how these concepts might apply, please contact our office, file a pre-application, or submit a help desk ticket. We are always happy to help. So next, we're going to talk about technology descriptions. And as you may have heard us say in previous webinars, the most critical aspect of your Safety Act application, no matter the type, is the technology description. All applications ask you to define the what and the how of your technology and tell us who you are and what you do. That's the technology description, also sometimes called the Exhibit A. We use the word technology as a term of art. Simply put, it means whatever it is that you provide or use internally that provides an anti-terrorism benefit, in this case, venue or stadium security. An application for multiple venues in different locations may encounter challenges in defining the technology because it might have some customizable elements. This can be a particular challenge. In these cases, it is important to define your baseline anti-terrorism offering and those elements that are customizable or optional. When describing your technology, try to keep it as simple as possible and do not use marketing language. We are looking for the facts. What is your technology, and what are you seeking Safety Act protections for? It is important to be clear and concise in describing your technology. The technology description is what will be evaluated for Safety Act protections and what would eventually form the legal definition of your technology and be protected under the Safety Act. While reviewing your submission, we will ask you for information supporting all aspects of the technology description. For example, if you are providing access control and a security plan, we will want to see information on both. Scoping your technology matters too. For example, you might consider if your plans, policies, and procedures and staffing differ for event days and non-event days. If your venue has a sporting season, such as college basketball or Major League Baseball, we are interested in your procedures on non-event days outside of the sporting season too. We are also interested in the physical location of your facility, i.e., are you located on a city street where you do not have a large standoff distance? Or are you located on a campus where you may be better able to control standoff distances and a perimeter? Also, focus on how you carry out your policies and procedures. Think about the physical, technical, and electronic security measures that you use, such as CCTV cameras or concrete barriers. To protect your patrons and staffs, what types of evacuation, emergency management, or other safety plans do you have? Finally, what are your personnel assets on site? Do you use canine explosive detection teams or have on-site EMS and fire personnel? You need to tell us about all those things. So to review, in your description, you should tell us how you protect your venue, what aspects are invariable from one event to the next, what aspects differ on event and non-event days, and the types of threats your program is intended to counter. The technology description should be clear and concise and include all pieces that you would like to have covered by the Safety Act, as it will be used as the legal definition should Safety Act protections need to be invoked. So if you offer something like training, maintenance of hardware, or a command center, along with your security plan, include those elements in your technology description. Next, be sure to address how your technology is an anti-terrorism technology. That's critical. Remember, it's the Support Anti-Terrorism by Fostering Effective Technologies Act, so focus on the anti-terrorism benefit. And finally, try to avoid using jargon or language taken from marketing materials so that one can readily gain a clear understanding of your technology. For venue security applications, one of the most commonly encountered challenge is drafting your technology description. That's why we consider drafting a technology description to be an interactive process. It's helpful to work with OSAI to determine the most complete definition that can be reasonably evaluated as part of our review process. Also, please remember, if you make changes in the future to any processes or procedures, or update your technology with more components, you might be able to modify those things later via a notice of modification. So start with what you're doing today, not what you plan to do in the future, and focus your technology description on things that you can support. So next, we're going to talk about preparing an application. Once you have your technology definition drafted, it's time to begin working on your Safety Act application. As we've covered in other webinars, the Safety Act application kit consists of questions and instructions. However, one of the most common comments in teleconferences is that it's sometimes unclear how those questions in the application kit apply to services, particularly to venue security. Because the Safety Act covers a range of products and services, the questions are meant to capture all technologies. However, most of the questions in the application kit can be answered by addressing the layers of venue security. In the next segment of the webinar, we will talk about how to document those layers and provide a map against the Safety Act application kit. Because the Safety Act review process is largely paper-based, it's important to address all the questions in the application kit, including the financial questions, and to provide supporting attachments. Security and venue applications typically have numerous attachments, so don't forget to include a table of contents and to reference your attachments as part of your narrative responses. So, how do you translate these layers of stadium security to paper? You might wonder how you can capture your service on paper given the human factors and technical assets involved. Further, measures for effectiveness and methods for testing effectiveness for services are not always clear. So, how do you begin to describe in your application what you do? On the screen, you should see 5 basic questions to consider. First, how did you develop your service? Second, how do you provide your service? Third, who provides the service? Fourth, how do you monitor and improve effectiveness? And 5, who carries your insurance? These questions go to the heart of your application. You will want to develop your story through these questions. Start telling your story from the beginning. What process did you go through to develop your technology and why? Who are your managers? And how is quality assurance and oversight applied? Who are your employees? How do you know what you are doing works? Do you have audits? Do you have drills? Customer reviews? As we work through the layers of security, I'll point out ways to develop your story and materials that might be used to support your submission. As you begin the Safety Act application process, you should also refer back to your technology description and start making lists of the documentation you have available to support the various elements contained in that technology description. This method will also allow you to eliminate elements of your technology that might not be supportable right now. And remember, if they're not supportable right now, you can always file a notice of modification later. However, the typical documentation that we typically look for includes personnel hiring, training and vetting, quality assurance and control processes, standard operating procedures, copies of handbooks and action plans, and the like. We will address more specifically what to provide in an application later in this presentation. Finally, remember to identify the corporate entity that carries the insurance policies that provide coverage for third-party liability claims in the event that a technology's fails to perform as intended during an act of terrorism. The corporate entity we are talking about here is the primary named insured on the insurance documents, and the coverage should extend to all entities that might be listed as sellers of your technology. For each insurance policy that would respond, please answer all parts of item D16.1, including references to footnotes. Once you have identified the corporate entity that is the primary named insured on the insurance policies, you should provide its most recent financial documents, which would include its balance sheet, income statement, and statement of cash flow. We will talk about technology revenue and cost projections, which correspond to item D16.4 in more detail later. So now we're going to move on to the layers of security. Best industry practice indicates that venues are best protected through the use of multiple layers of security. Like the construction of an arena or stadium, there can be many levels and layers to your protection of your venue and patrons. For stadium security-related applications, the majority of information supplied, outside of the insurance and financial information, can be imagined as the layers of the stadium. The foundation and groundwork of the technology is the threat and vulnerability assessments. How you develop the technology, i.e. your plans and policies and procedures, are the rules for the playing field or stage on which your technology performs. The personnel assets who perform the security are the entry to the stadium. The recruiting, vetting, and training processes are the focus of this layer of security. The next layer is comprised of the technical, physical, and electronic security measures you might use. We can think of your performance and effectiveness as the scoreboards and information board across the second level of most stadiums. The upper tier of the stadium security is your safety and evacuation plans. And finally, the dome of your security is coordination with state, local, and federal authorities. So how do all of these relate to your technology and the application, you might ask? Well, let's go through each one. Let's take a look at the foundation of your stadium, the vulnerability, risk, and threat assessments. This threat assessment could have been conducted by you or a third party. It could have been done pre-construction or post-construction. But we view a threat and vulnerability assessment as the starting point for venue security. So, let's build up that foundation. The first layer of your stadium security is a threat, vulnerability, risk, needs assessment, and or other forms of formal assessments that form the development of your technology. First, we want to understand the process that you went through to develop your technology. So, in your application, talk a bit about your history. For example, what process did you use to identify vulnerabilities in your facility that resulted in a complete security plan? What was evaluated in the threat assessment? Did you conduct it, or did you have an independent agent analyze your facility? All of these questions are important to ask as you develop your application. A common mistake in application is simply presenting the final product, like the security plan, without discussing the resources or research and/or industry best practices used in its development. Describing to us the whys and hows of your development process can indicate that the technology was based on solid, accepted security principles. An analogy is to think of this as the foundation of a home under construction. To be effective, a security plan must have a strong, solid foundation. Second, we want to know more about your facility. Is the venue a new construction? Was security considered as part of the construction or design of the stadium? How was this done? How have assessment recommendations been incorporated into an existing facility? We also want to know how often you reassess the threats to your venue. Have your policies, plans, or procedures been updated to keep current with the evolving threat environment? Types of documentation that will help us understand the development of your technology are the original assessments and any more recent assessments that have been conducted. In your narrative, it is important to tell us how you vet the recommendations made in an assessment. What recommendations were accepted for implementation, and which were rejected or postponed? Why? We are interested in how you've addressed or mitigated the risks found in analyses. We will also ask how frequently you conduct a threat and risk assessment and how often you review those assessments. Threats are dynamic, and we like to see that your threat and risk assessment process is also dynamic. Be sure to tell us who conducted the assessment and what expertise that person or company has in this type of work. Don't make it harder than it is, though. There is no one right answer. There is simply what you did. If you relied on domain expertise, that's fine. Did you use a cost-benefit analysis to make decisions about security technologies at a venue? That's great. Help us understand how that worked, because we understand that resources can be limited. Your policies and procedures. Looking at the layers of your stadium program, it's the plans and policies and procedures that are the field of play or stage for your technology. The plans, policies, and procedures govern how your venue is secured. We're going to look at that area next. When we talk about your plans, policies, and procedures, we are interested in your security requirements and in how those requirements are implemented operationally. We are also looking at how you define your quality control, what your safety plans are, and how the procedures make your security effective and successful. Something to keep in mind, as with the technology description is, do your plans and procedures differ for event days and non-event days? Because venues often hold multiple types of events, such as sporting events and concerts, do the plans and procedures differ based on the event type? Sometimes it's helpful to include a summary table addressing the differences between plans for different event types and for event and non-event days. So, we also want to know about the resources you used in developing your process. Did you use federal guidance documents, best practices, or industry standards? Clearly identifying what information was wrapped into your development process and the decision-making process that resulted in your security procedures and plans are good to know. If your processes follow procedures outlined in a third-party document, make sure you focus on how you adapted that document and implemented these practices into your documentation. Don't just provide us with a link to the source materials. Generally, it's important for OSAI to understand each component of your technology and how you have developed the components. Detailed documentation can demonstrate you have an overarching plan that governs security. Formal processes can also be used to support the ability to deploy for all events you host and demonstrate that you have a repeatable process to deliver consistent services for all events. On the screen, you should see a number of items that support your development and update processes. When we talk about development processes, maybe you used existing industry best practices or standards. For example, if you use canine explosive detection services, it is important to tell us how you selected a particular vendor. If you have a proprietary canine force, how do you select, kennel, and train your canines? What standards do you or your vendor follow? As another example, if it is your policy to use only Safety Act designated vendors, you should also describe your own requirements for a particular service vendor. Alternatively, you might have based a specific training process on available DHS guidance. In documenting your process, identify the resource material and explain how it was used. Identifying the standard is good, but describing how it was incorporated is also essential. For security officers, you should tell us if you hire a contract security company or if you have developed a proprietary security officer program. You should be prepared to supply employee guidelines and plans that officers are to follow, including standard operating procedures or post orders. Documentation might include your security plan, your emergency action plan, your emergency contact procedures, evacuation plans, and the like. In addition to addressing these developmental aspects, you will want to document your process for updating your security program. This can take the form of quality assurance plans and review schedules. You should show us that plan in action. For example, if you conduct a yearly audit of every location, provide us with examples. However, in documenting quality assurance reviews, don't forget to describe how you addressed any findings. We know that not everything is perfect. So, what we're looking for is your process for reviewing your service and the process for addressing areas for improvement that might come from those reviews. Finally, make sure that the examples are dated, and if manuals are updated periodically, please note how often. Again, all data and documentation that we collect is confidential. We know that sometimes these processes are proprietary, and all users of the DHS CIO Certified and Accredited Safety Act website sign conflict of interest statements and non-disclosure agreements for each applications. We look at how you use internal processes to refine and update your technology over time. Threats change and people are people. So, what processes do you have in place to identify new threats and update your security accordingly? What processes do you have that allow you to identify gaps in human performance and correct those problems? What's your quality assurance and auditing process? It's important when you talk about updating and refining your service to talk about how frequent your review process is. Do you conduct rotating quarterly audits? Do you review your security plan annually? Do you have a process in place for quick fixes and rapid updates for emergent threats? What is the process to ensure that all of the people involved in providing your service receive that information? Equally important is documenting that while you might have reviewed your service, you might have elected not to make changes. Documenting that you went through the review process and the results are important. If you use domain expertise, you will want to document what that expertise is. Who are the major contributors? What is their background? Documentation could include bios of principals and/or resumes. Because we also look at how your process is updated and refined in response to emergent threats, we will want to understand your process for maintaining expertise. Do you sit on working groups, belong to industry associations, consult with others in the industry, or something equivalent? Do you have a policy for the continuing education of staff? All of these things can be important to provide to OSAI. You also cannot provide a service without people, so we need to talk about the personnel assets of your technology. Many times, the guests or patrons first experience your technology with the personnel and staff at the entrance to your venue. We consider the personnel, then, the gateway to your technology, and that's our next area of focus. Underlying your technology are the professionals who provide your service. We touched on that a bit in the last section when we talked about supporting the domain expertise of your principals. Stadium and event security services rely on the quality of the people performing that service. Therefore, we like to look at a couple staffing bases. First, what types of people do you need to provide the technology? Do you have a sample organizational chart that can be used to show us how your service is implemented and how operations work? Do you have regional managers, site supervisors, auditors, individual practitioners? Once you have identified the key roles, expand on the base qualifications for these roles. Provide job descriptions. Sometimes that helps. Next, how do you staff your technology? How are potential employees recruited, and what procedures does HR follow when hiring them? Do you have a process for vetting potential employees, such as performing a simple background, criminal, or financial check? Can you provide a representative sample of one of those checks? Who are the upper-level staff and core experts who are guiding internal policies and procedures, and why are they in that position? And once people are hired, how are they trained? What baseline training do they receive? When do they receive it? How much training? From whom? Who trains the trainers? What is the expertise of the trainers? What procedures are used to train? Do you keep training records? If so, describing how training records are tracked and providing some representative samples would be helpful. We also want to know if you provide annual refresher training or continuing education opportunities. How do you retrain underperforming employees? Do you have policies for retention of training and then retesting? Again, information on any of these topics is useful. Fourth and finally, how do you retain people? Do you have incentive programs? What's your attrition rate? How do you provide orientation to new employees? How do you remove underperforming employees? If you use contractors or outside vendors, we want to understand how they are selected. Do they receive the same training as your employees? How are they deployed, and when do you use them? On the next slide, we'll highlight some documentation that should be submitted. We encourage companies to start with your organizational charts. This can help you identify the key positions and help you identify the key individuals for which professional bios should be supplied and for which positions job descriptions should be supplied. The prior experiences of personnel can be provided to demonstrate the knowledge base of the people providing oversight for frontline employees. Certifications held by specific staff can also be provided in support of this. Next, if you have armed employees, make sure to remember to tell us how you check their firearms certifications and how you ensure they are recertified or eligible to carry a firearm. Safety policies, such as the use of force policies that you might have, should also be supplied. Next, we ask you to supply in your narrative or in a policy document your procedures for hiring and vetting new employees. This should include the minimum criteria such as education and experience and what types of background checks are performed before a person is hired. You should supply representative samples with personal identifying information redacted of background checks and the like. This is where records from your database might also be helpful. In general practice, show us the policy and then use examples to show us that you followed that policy. Training is also key. What is your baseline training program? Specifically your baseline anti-terrorism training. What training courses are required and which are optional? Do you offer specific anti-terrorism training courses? What is your training philosophy? Do you augment courses with daily shift meetings? As with many things related to the Safety Act, there is no one right answer, but we need to understand your approach. However, make sure, no matter your approach, that you highlight the specific anti-terrorism training provided. Information on training courses you should provide should range from initial to basic to annual training and should be given to us. A note of caution. A lot of people use PowerPoint slides as training materials. I know I do. And while I like to think my slides are amazing, they're often incomprehensible in the absence of my speaker notes. So please provide a description of your training along with the slides. That description should include the key elements that are emphasized on each slide every time the training is given. Or you can provide your speaker notes. Don't forget to talk about the trainers and their qualifications either. Also, talk about training frequency and how you track training completion. This is where database records can be helpful. Other training materials could include training curricula, handouts, training bulletins, daily briefings for venues, and tests administered to those completing training, with information on what constitutes passing the test. We also want to know the difference in your staffing levels for event days and non-event days. Where are people stationed? What types of duties do they perform? Next, we'll be talking about the technical and electronic security measures. That's our next layer of stadium security. These measures might be used to protect your staff, patrons, participants, and venue. Continuing our metaphor of the stadium or arena as your technology, this layer can be considered your press box, where most of the technical equipment resides. So let's talk about how you secure your perimeter, control access to the venue, and what types of electronic security devices you might use. As I said, the next layer of your stadium or venue security that I want to talk about is the technical security solutions that you might use. So first, let's talk about the perimeter of your facility. For example, where is your venue located? Is it near a mass transit hub? Is this included in your threat assessment? Is the physical location of your facility such that you cannot have large standoff distances? Is it near a city street that you can't control? If so, how do you mitigate this risk during events? How do you secure the perimeter? What type of standoff distance do you have? Do you use bollards or other types of vehicle interdiction devices? What are the ratings on any of these barriers? Do you have open air or closed parking structures at your facility? How do you secure these structures or parking lots? As I mentioned earlier, you might use canine explosive detection teams as part of your security procedures. When are these teams deployed? How many teams and personnel do you typically use? How are they trained? Are they certified? Next, let's talk about access control. When guests, employees, contractors, athletes, performers, or support staff enter the venue, what are your screening procedures? Do you pat people down? Use a walkthrough or handheld metal detector? Are these procedures affected by the type of event you are hosting? For areas of restricted access, we want to understand how you control entry. For example, how are credentials issued? Do you use badges that are color-coded? What are your policies and procedures for granting credentials to staff, players, officials, or the press? Do these procedures vary for event day or non-event days? How are your doors secured? Are they armed with alarms if an unauthorized person enters restricted areas? Are alarms monitored with cameras? Now, let's move on and talk about the electronic security measures you might use. There are a wide range of electronic security measures that can be used to secure your facility, from motion detectors and CCTV cameras to air quality sensors and public address systems. We want to know what types of equipment you use. We also want to understand how you keep that equipment in good working order. So if you have manuals or maintenance schedules or plans, consider including them in your application. If you employ contractors to keep them maintained, that's great. We just want to see your process and know how your venue is secured. Things to think about when you are putting your application together. Number 1, if you use CCTV cameras, how many cameras did you use? What type of cameras? Why did you choose that particular brand of camera? Are all areas of your facility covered with cameras or only selected locations? How do you determine where they're placed? Do you have any dead areas? Are you integrating cameras with access control alarms? We talked about your access control procedures on the last slide, and we would also like to know if you use handheld magnetometers, walk-through metal detectors, or other equipment to screen patrons, staff, participants, or other personnel. Also, do you use electronic key cards or card readers to limit access to certain areas? Again, how are these areas alarmed? Be prepared to discuss staffing and operation of your command and control center. We also want to know how you protect your command center. For example, is there a backup off-site location? Are security guards posted at the entry? Do you have a hardened command and control center? When I say hardened, I want to know if you have a command and control center that is designed to withstand winds or minimize blast effects. In your command and control center, do you have a guest text messaging service or other means for guests to notify you of incidents? Is this service coordinated with the command center? Do you monitor social media for potential protests or threats? We know that more than just people come in and out of your venue too. You probably receive a lot of fan mail and other deliveries. To handle deliveries, do you have a loading dock? What are your procedures for personnel and access to the loading dock? Do you permit only scheduled deliveries? What sort of screening does incoming mail or parcels undergo? Do you perform any specific tests or screening for explosives or chemical, biological, or radiological materials? How do you maintain that screening equipment? Do you screen mail for written threats? Finally, what type of public address system do you use? How do you alert patrons to emergencies? Also, do you have on-site fire or medical personnel that you need to communicate with? Please tell us about that as well. So, what's the next layer of your stadium security program? Well, look to your scoreboards to check out your performance. Performance can be confusing. I mean, really, you're providing a service to secure your venue. How do you measure performance? There are a variety of ways you can tell us how well you're doing. So let's take a look at how OSAI understands and evaluates performance. Part of the Safety Act application asks you how to demonstrate the ability of your technology to perform its anti-terrorism mission and show how it is effective in doing so. This can be shown by documenting the measures taken to ensure all employees are following the processes and procedures that we've already talked about. This would help you to demonstrate that you have a repeatable process for deployment. Additionally, if you participate in exercises, run drills, conduct audits, spot check employees, and other things like that, you should document the results to document your performance. A representative sampling is key for documenting performance. If you perform periodic tabletop and/or full-scale exercises, an after-action report can also support continuous training and self-improvement. Additionally, if you adhere to a league or industry best practice and have participated in a third-party assessment against adherence to those practices, those results can be good performance information. You might also have effectiveness information for specific elements of your technology. For example, recertification records for canine explosive detection teams are a good way to show the effectiveness of that component. If you do subsystem checks of your public address systems or camera systems before events, that shows a measure of effectiveness as well. Think about what you do on a daily, monthly, and yearly basis to ensure the functioning of the various components of your technology and start maintaining records that might help show that things work. You can also use incident reports that are not terrorism related to show that your people and procedures work. For example, responding to a medical emergency or a natural disaster like a severe weather event, or simply identifying contraband carried in by a patron might show your ability to respond in a crisis and to ensure that procedures are followed. You might also show how your routine review of incident reports provides a way for you to evaluate the overall operation of your program and might support your process for updating the service. Similarly, responses to criminal activity might provide data. To support the information in your application, we ask that you supply the names of individuals that can verify the operation and effectiveness of your program. If you have more than one location, please provide a list of each location, we call this a deployment, and with current contact information for local points of contact. If you are applying for protections of a single venue, your points of contact might be federal, state, or local public safety authorities who might help us understand your operations. We ask that you make sure their information is current, they know that we will call, and why it's important to you that they respond promptly. Results from internal league law enforcement, such as U.S. Secret Service or DHS PSA evaluations, or contract audits or inspections can be used to support your performance and effectiveness. You can supply performance information related to how you implement your quality control and assurance procedures and any documented cases you have where corrective action was taken, where an employee did not follow the documented processes and procedures, or where you determined that your policies and procedures needed to be improved or revised. This can support performance. In support of your effectiveness, you could also supply anecdotal reports, daily incident reports, and testimonials from POCs. We talked about your plans for quality control. Do you conduct any internal audits of your venue and procedures? We would like to see any process documents for your audits and checklists you might have used to assess your own performance. Have you been audited by an outside agency, either a risk assessment firm, a sports league, or a government agency? If you've participated in a DHS site assistance visit, the results of these visits can help us understand your vulnerabilities and your program. Performance can also be demonstrated for services in the form of red team events, after-action reports, and incident reports to address lessons learned with all employees. Again, if you conduct tabletop exercises, how often do they occur? Examples of these exercises can help us see how you prepare for a variety of emergencies or situations. Okay, I hope everyone's still with me. So let's talk about our next layer, which is your safety programs. You need to consider the safety of all your patrons. Your evacuation plans should cover the people in all the levels of your venue, and that's where safety comes in our metaphorical stadium. Safety of your staff, patrons, participants, and contractors is paramount. We want to understand how you mitigate your risks and plan for emergencies. Documentation that can help us see that you have addressed safety includes a safety plan, an evacuation plan, and an emergency action plan. We want to know if you have considered things like an active shooter incident, or if you've looked at the safety and defense of the food that's sold in your venue. So tell us what the main safety hazards associated with your technology are. Are there risks associated with your personnel, procedures, and location? Do you have plans to triage victims in the event of a mass casualty? Or do you have exiting arrangements with localities to deal with a mass casualty event? Does your mass casualty planning training include training your security officers to minimize the risks of themselves, such as from unruly patrons or bloodborne hazards? What about bomb threats, suspicious packages? Do you have a food defense plan? What is your firearms policy for off-duty law enforcement who might be attending your event? What is your active shooter plan if you have one? We want to see your evacuation plans to help us know how you ensure the safety of your guests. Further, do you have a corporate safety plan? How do you incorporate awareness of safety in your training for your frontline personnel, operators, contractors? The final layer is the dome of your program, your coordination with local, state, and federal authorities. We know that not all incidents that you deal with occur inside your venue, and adequate communication and coordination with first responders is a major part of that. So let's talk about the sort of documentation you can provide to show how you are a part of the larger community. Great. We know that you aren't an island. Sometimes you will need to work with outside agencies to ensure that the safety of your guest. On event days, this may be of particular concern. Do you have on-site fire or EMS? If so, how many personnel are there? What are the terms of their engagement? Provide standard operating procedures that tell us how all the pieces go together if available. We'll also want to know if you have a paid detail of off-duty law enforcement officers. If so, how are these officers trained to operate in your venue? Do you rely on their current training from the police force? How do you ensure the currency of their training? What is your level of coordination with local first responders and law enforcement? Do they provide extra support on event days? What is their involvement on non-event days? Do the local authorities provide input on your evacuation and emergency plans? Do they review them after they've been developed? What sort of drills do you participate in with local law enforcement? Finally, are you supported by any special teams such as SWAT, hazmat, or other specialty law enforcement teams? Are these engaged only on event days? Listed on the screen are the major technical questions from the designation and certification applications to which we have mapped those layers of stadium security. It may look complicated, but we'll work through it. Recall that the initial needs assessment is the foundation on which you have developed your technology. The plans, policies, and procedures define how you conduct your security. These processes help us to understand each component of your technology. This can inform D9, where you provide a description of your technology. When you write your response to D9, we will also want to know about the types of personnel who perform the services and the technical measures you use to secure the venue. D10 asks you to provide information on how you deploy and operate your technology in the field. This can be answered using some of the examples, such as the strategic planning, best practices adhered to, a statement of work, your training program, the expertise of your personnel involved. Your safety and evacuation plans and your coordination with local authorities can also help us understand how you deploy your technology. Item D11 asks you about your readiness to deploy the technology. Sure, you may have deployed it in the past, but how do you ensure you can continue to deploy it tomorrow? Your policies, personnel assets, and training programs can support this with your documented processes for hiring and vetting. D12 asks you to describe the risk to the public should your technology not be deployed. This is where your threat assessment and safety procedures can come into play, and where you can talk about the anti-terrorism aspects of your technologies. D14 is where you can supply measures of effectiveness, which can be supported by performance and your policies and procedures. The experience and certifications held by your staff, quality control procedures, and any necessary corrective actions, examples of successful deployments, independent evaluations, after-action reports, contractor performance documents can all be supplied to support the effectiveness of your technology. C4 asks for evidence that your technology will perform and be effective over the long term. This, similar to D14, can be supported by performance and policies and procedures with an emphasis on quality assurance, mitigation of any deficiencies, and training updates. Performance in the field across all your events might also be helpful. C5 wants you to describe how you ensure your technology performs to your specification. This can be supported by your personnel and policies and procedures. Your procedures and how you ensure that people follow those procedures can be provided. C6 is where you provide information to demonstrate your technology is safe for use as intended. Safety can provide much of this information, such as standards you adhere to, safety procedures that aren't part of your training program, and etc. This is not meant to be a comprehensive list, nor are you limited to what layers of security map to which questions. But this should give you a good start to assemble information for your application. I want to take a look at one specific question. In our experience, many applicants applying for stadium or event security have questions on how to respond to item D16.4, Technology Revenue Projections. Therefore, we will spend some time detailing what we are looking for here. More often than not, the technology is an internal or bundled service provided to patrons without a separate price. In this case, cost projections exclusive to the technology should be reported in place of the revenue. The cost data should be for each of the next 3 years and include total costs of providing the technology. The cost figures should include all of the following: fully burdened labor costs for all employees and contractors involved in providing the technology, including any benefits; overhead, equipment costs, costs of contracted services. Please provide as complete an estimate for each of the next 3 years as possible, and provide an explanation for what the estimate does or does not include. Over the past several years, we've noticed areas that commonly trip companies up in supplying security-related applications. So next, we'll be providing a few general case studies that demonstrate lessons learned and key takeaways for submitting your Safety Act application. Number 1, this is my favorite topic. One of the best ways is to make sure you aren't making small mistakes that will lead to an incomplete application is by using the pre-application process appropriately. Pre-applications allow us an opportunity to discuss with you how to fine-tune your technology description. It'll let us understand your business operations and help you identify documents for the critical elements of your services. You don't need to treat a pre-application like a full application, but you can do more than simply state what your technology is. The best way to make use of the pre-app process is for you to give OSAI a solid and specific definition of what your technology is, and clearly define what your anti-terrorism components are. Finally, as in the full application, we need to make sure you answer all the questions. It's not helpful to state that certain information is available upon request. Please make sure, because there's a purpose for each question, that you submit all the information that is requested, and it will be kept confidential. Next, we don't ask for perfection. Therefore, after documenting effectiveness, it's important to highlight any potential weaknesses. For example, high employee turnover can occur in the security industry. Averages can be over 100% in some places. What's important to us is that you recognize this and address it. Things like a well-defined initial and annual training program can offset turnover, and it can offset changes in threat and changes in requirements. Also, sometimes our procedures don't work in the face of an incident. How do you learn from events and exercises? How do you document your findings? And what do you do with those findings to make yourself better? Don't be afraid to show us your warts. We all grow and change based on our experience, and we expect that you do too. Also, security might have inherent safety issues. Address them. A canine unit might, for example, have issue with bites or working around explosives or interaction with an unpredictable public. This can be overcome with training, retraining, and oversight. You could also include a discussion on corporate commitment to security. Addressing our weaknesses sometimes includes the need for additional financial investments. What does your security budget look like? Is it possible to get additional resources if the need arises? Do you have out-year plans for additional resources? What's your long-term strategy? Many applicants in the past describe self-checking quality assurance mechanisms implemented by the same individuals who operationally deploy the technology. That's great, but it does introduce uncertainty as how do people operationally deploy a technology and provide an objective review. Therefore, if you have an external or third-party QA oversight mechanism or a separate QA unit within the company which reports directly to senior management outside of the operational structure, please provide details on that structure. If you don't, please discuss why your current QA approach works. The best service applications should contain a description of your QA process in the ATD details, copies of the corporate QA policy and procedural documents, an organizational chart showing the independent QA structure within the company reporting directly to senior management and bypassing the operational managers, an audit process by which an applicant uses to ensure the autonomy of that QA reporting, particularly performed by the applicant's own personnel and not an outside or third-party entity, a clear description of how QA data is used to implement corrective measures, and how follow-on QA checks are conducted to check that required measures have been both implemented and successful in correcting the technology as needed. Also give us representative examples of use of your QA process within the technology. Representative examples should include checks of the service operationally, for example, QA inspections of the security guards on post, checks of the training program to ensure the training curriculum is appropriate for the particular services being provided, and that instructors have proper credentials and experience. It also could include monitoring of training records to ensure that all personnel providing the service have received initial and refresher training, and that training and certification credentials are current. And documentation of the review of operational incidents to ensure proper actions were taken, and showing how after-action validation was conducted and any modifications to security implemented if needed. I do want to thank you all for joining us today. And we're putting up on the screen how to contact the Office of Safety Act Implementation. Remember, we're here to help you as you start or continue your Safety Act journey. I'm going to turn it over to Bruce Davidson for some closing remarks. Bruce?
Thank you, Laura. Well, I'm glad that you were able to join us today. We had a pretty good group with us, and we hope this webinar has been useful for you and that you have picked up some insights that you'll put to good use in your areas of responsibility. For venue security from the top level, I think you'll agree that we're really talking about systems, or systems of systems. Without involved and committed leadership, these systems tend to atrophy over time. So executive buy-in and continued involvement are critical. Hopefully, going through the Safety Act approval process for your technology, whether it is a product, service, or security plans deployed at a venue, will enable you to better articulate your business case for your leadership and your customers. And this will result in widespread deployments of more effective anti-terrorism technologies and capabilities. The Safety Act team is committed to your success. We are not successful unless you are successful. We are driven to serve and deliver value to you and to create change that matters through a relentless focus on program execution and commitment to providing exceptional service to stakeholders. We're a small program with a growing workload, and I will be the first to acknowledge that we may not always measure up to that goal, but it is our goal nonetheless, which we pursue with considerable energy and passion. We have some initiatives underway that should help us take the program to the next level, and hopefully will provide you some additional resources that you'll be able to put to good use. First, under the auspices of the DHS S&T Office of University Programs, a DHS Center of Excellence, the Command, Control, and Interoperability Center for Advanced Data Analysis at Rutgers University recently concluded a research project on stadium security and developed a best practices resource guide for stadium security. Second, we have completed a research project intended to develop a resource guide covering best practices for anti-terrorism security programs for metropolitan commercial office buildings and multimodal transportation hubs. Third, as a follow-on to this last project, we're in the midst of a research project that hopefully will enable us to create a mechanism for third-party assessments of facilities. And use the reports from these assessments can be used in support of a Safety Act application for security systems deployed at these venues. We hope to have more news on these initiatives later for you in the fiscal year. We're working our way through the document editing, the review process, the release process, and are budgeting time for these activities as best we can while not detracting from our other programmatic responsibilities, such as the timely evaluation of applications. We look forward to continuing dialogue with you and our continued collaboration, and of course your future applications. Thanks for joining us today.
Okay, great. I think that wraps up our prepared remarks, but we'd like to address the questions submitted in advance and take some questions from the phone line. Were there any questions submitted in advance that we wanted to deal with?
There are a few, yes. We tried to incorporate most of those questions that we received in advance into the presentation, but there are a few that seem to have a repeated theme to them, so I'd like to address them first of all. One of the questions was, when you evaluate a venue or arena, sports facility, or anything of the like, does the department make a site visit to that facility as part of its review of that application? Typically we do. We'll send a review team out, and in many instances we'll send a member of the leadership team out to the facility to meet with leadership at the facility, to have a tour, familiarization of what's involved, and also to consult with the various stakeholders who are involved in providing security at that venue. A second question that we get repeatedly is, we understand that you have a 120-day timeline for review of these applications. Is that followed when you're dealing with venues? The answer is we try to, but in many instances we're not able to complete a thorough review of a venue with its various layers of security employed there in 120 days. More likely, these are taking anywhere from 150 to 200 days, just due to the complexity and nature of these applications. We have a couple of initiatives underway to try to incorporate some efficiencies into the review process. That is still a work in progress. And the third question we've had a couple of times is, if I am a vendor or seller of a product or a service that is receives Safety Act protections, how do I communicate that to prospective customers who might be interested in procuring my product or service? Well, behind us, I think you can see some of the representations of the seals or the marks that the Safety Act program authorizes for DHS to be used by approved applicants, whether for a DT&E designation, a designation, or a certification. There's a terms of use agreement that has to be signed by the successful applicant, and then the pixels for the appropriate mark will be sent to you for you to use along with your product literature and other materials. Those are some of the basic questions that we had. It seemed to be thematic in nature. There were a couple others that we tried to incorporate into the presentation, but now we'd entertain any additional ones in a few minutes we have remaining to see if there's anything that we missed or something that someone would like us to try to address right now.
All right, Priscilla, if we could open up the phone line.
If you would like to ask a question, please press star one from your touch-tone phone. Please unmute your phone and record your first and last name, as this information is needed to introduce your question. Once again, if you would like to ask a question, please press star one from your touch-tone phone. One moment, please, to see if we have any questions.
Anticipate the office to go with the complexity of applications and number of applications.
Okay, we have one here. It says, do you anticipate your office to grow as the complexity of applications and the number of applications increase dramatically? We're on a slight growth curve right now. We are expecting to add 2 people to the office in the next couple months, and we may try to add some more in the future. Part of that is, of course, budgetary in nature. The S&T Directorate has a certain amount of funds that are available for us to use for hiring federal employees, and those have some limits to them. So it is a competitive process for all the programs here to add personnel to the programs, but we're going to have a modest increase, I think, in the next couple months. There's a possibility, if the program continues to grow, that we will look to add more staff in-house and contract support to this program as we continue to grow and expand.
Great, thank you.
There are no questions in queue at this time.
Okay, excellent. We've got another one from the chat room. Who in the future will be the final approving authority of the Safety Act? Is the new Undersecretary going to take over that responsibility?
We don't know if the new Under is going to take that over directly or not. As you're probably aware, the Secretary has delegated his authority to manage the program, with the exception of the authority to declare that an act is an act of terrorism, which would trigger the Safety Act protections. But everything else has been delegated to the Undersecretary for Science and Technology. The Undersecretary has designated the Deputy Undersecretary as another senior official to oversee and manage this program and to make final decisions on applications submitted for the program. Currently, our Deputy Undersecretary is the individual who is undertaking those responsibilities. Our new Undersecretary has been in the job only about a week and getting grounded in the Directorate, and we'll await further instructions and guidance from him as to the level of his direct personal involvement in reviewing and approving any applications.
Okay. Well, if there's no questions on the phone, we will leave the chat room open for a few more minutes. Certainly, we did show our contact information. We're always willing to have a teleconference, open up the, another question. Once approved by DHS Safety Act designation, how long is it valid for?
Typically, it's 5 years. For a DT&E designation, for a technology which is going to go out for a pilot study or for some T&E in an operational environment, it's up to 3 years. But for a straight designation, it's typically 5 years. There's a process for a renewal. We encourage successful applicants to think about renewals early in the process. You can submit a renewal application as early as 2 years prior to the expiration of your coverage. It's always a good thing to get involved with that on the early side rather than wait till the 11th hour to submit an application, so you'll have continuity of coverage.
There are, I think, 2 more questions in the chat room that we'll take, and then because I think we're running short on time and be given, I think, the high sign, we will entertain other questions via the help desk. The first question we'll take is, if TRIA is not renewed, how will the Safety Act be affected?
I think it can potentially have a significant effect on the Safety Act program. Some of the impacts are sort of unknown, but intuitively it could have a couple of impacts. And this is just my opinion. We'll have to wait to see. Hopefully it will be renewed. But first of all, a lot of the insurance policies that companies procure to meet the requirement the department levies to carry a certain level of insurance, which is a level that meets your liability cap, that is in high percentage of the cases is underwritten or backstopped by TRIA. And if TRIA is not renewed, one could expect those premiums to increase potentially significantly. And so we'd have to take a relook at what levels of insurance that we're requiring of some applicants, particularly if those premiums do tend to increase significantly. The second thing that may be a little more speculative, but if TRIA is not renewed, it's possible that some insurance companies will take another look at the way they underwrite some of these risks, and in some of the large urban areas where they have a concentration of risk, the availability of insurance may be somewhat more difficult. So those are things that we're going to have to take a look at. I understand that there is work on Capitol Hill to try to get TRIA renewed, and we hope that those efforts do pan out, because that's been a pretty good component of the insurance that applicants have been getting over the years for this program. If it's not renewed, we're going to see where we stand and move on and keep the program going. But we may have to change our evaluation of insurance requirements a little bit.
Okay, and last, do any of the sports league best security practices provide flow-down protections to any of the stadiums?
They do, and this is a sort of a very nuanced type of answer or question, actually. The flow-down protection from a best practices application is not complete flow down where the stadium owner or operator doesn't have to do anything to receive protection from an act of terrorism. In fact, they have to do quite a lot. What the flow down from best practices will provide is that claims against the best practices should provide flow down liability protection to the individual stadium owner or operator who implements those best practices. But the way that the stadium owner or operator actually implements those best practices would not be covered by the flow down. There's a lot of work that has to go into implementing a set of best practices. The stadiums tend to be unique. Some of them have little standoffs, some are by busy city streets, some of them are older venues, some are brand new venues that have been constructed with security, at least partially in mind. So there is a certain uniqueness to each of these stadiums, and it is incumbent upon each stadium owner or operator to implement those best practices if they're part of one of these league programs. So the flow down liability protection is there in part. It's not really as much as some people think it could be. And if you have any specific questions about it regarding your situation, please send us an email or give us a call, and we'll talk to you in more detail about it.
All right, well, I think, folks, that's all we have time for today. As always, thank you for tuning in and sticking with us all afternoon. I know that all of you have very busy schedules, and please don't hesitate to contact the office if you have additional questions. Thank you, and have a good day.
Thanks a lot, folks.